This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Charlene Harris. Email soundchest@yahoo.com. The Junior Classics, Volume 1, by William Patton. Chapter 83, Beauty and the Beast, by Madame d'Aulnoy. There was once a very rich merchant who had 6 children, 3 boys and 3 girls. As he was himself a man of great sense, he spared no expense for their education. The 3 daughters were all handsome, but particularly the youngest. Indeed, she was so very beautiful that in her childhood everyone called her the Little Beauty, and being equally lovely when she was grown up, nobody called her by any other name, which made her sisters very jealous of her. This youngest daughter was not only more handsome than her sisters, but also was better tempered. The 2 eldest were vain of their wealth and position. They gave themselves 1,000 airs, and refused to visit other merchants' daughters, nor would they condescend to be seen except with persons of quality. They went every day to balls, plays, and public walks, and always made game of their youngest sister for spending her time in reading or other useful employments. As it was well known that these ladies would have large fortunes, many great merchants wished to get them for wives. But the 2 eldest always answered that for their parts they had no thoughts of marrying anyone below a duke, or an earl at least. Beauty had quite as many offers as her sisters, but she always answered with the greatest civility that though she was much obliged to those who loved her, she would rather live some years longer with her father, as she thought herself too young to marry. It happened that, by some unlucky accident, the merchant suddenly lost all his fortune, and had nothing left but a small cottage in the country. Upon this he said to his daughters, while the tears ran down his cheeks, "My children, we must now go and dwell in the cottage, and try to get a living by labor, for we have no other means of support." The 2 eldest replied that they did not know how to work, and would not leave town, for they had many who loved them enough who would be glad to marry them, though they had no longer any fortune. But in this they were mistaken, for when those they thought had loved them heard what had happened, they said the girls were so proud and ill-tempered that all we wanted was their fortune. We are not sorry at all to see their pride brought down. Let them show off their heirs to their cows and sheep. But everybody pitied poor Beauty, because she was so sweet-tempered and kind to all, and several gentlemen offered to marry her, though she had not a penny. But Beauty still refused, and said she could not think of leaving her poor father in this trouble. At first Beauty could not help sometimes crying in secret for the hardships she was now obliged to suffer. But in a very short time she said to herself, "All the crying in the world will do me no good, so I will try to be happy without a fortune." When they had removed to their cottage, the merchant and his 3 sons employed themselves in ploughing and sowing the fields and working in the garden. Beauty also did her part, for she rose by 4 o'clock every morning, lighted the fires, cleaned the house, and got ready the breakfast for the whole family. At first she found all this very hard, but she soon grew quite used to it, and thought it no hardship. Indeed, the work greatly benefited her health. When she had done, she used to amuse herself with reading, playing her music, or singing while she spun. But her 2 sisters were at a loss what to do to pass the time away. They had their breakfast in bed, and did not rise till 10 o'clock. Then they commonly walked out, but always found themselves soon very tired, when they would often sit down under a shady tree, and grieve for the loss of their carriage and fine clothes, and say to each other, "What a mean-spirited, poor, stupid creature our sister is, to be so content with this low way of life." But their father thought differently, and loved and admired his youngest child more than ever. After they lived in this manner for about a year, the merchant received a letter, which informed him that one of his richest ships, which he thought was lost, had just come onto port. This news made the 2 eldest sisters almost mad with joy, for they thought they should now leave the cottage and have all their finery again. When they found that their father must take a journey to the ship, the two eldest begged he would not fail to bring them back some new gowns, caps, rings, and all sorts of trinkets. But Beauty asked for nothing, for she thought in herself that all the ship was worth would hardly buy everything her sisters wished for. "Beauty," said the merchant, "how comes it that you ask for nothing? What can I bring you, my child?" "Since you are so kind as to think of me, dear father," she answered, "I should be glad if you would bring me a rose, for we have none in our garden." Now Beauty did not indeed wish for a rose, nor anything else, but she only said this that she might not affront her sisters. Otherwise they would have said she wanted her father to praise her for desiring nothing. The merchant took his leave of them and set out on his journey. But when he got to the ship, some persons went to law with him about the cargo, and after a deal of trouble he came back to his cottage as poor as he had left it. When he was within 30 miles of his home, and thinking of the joy of again meeting his children, he lost his way in the midst of a dense forest. It rained and snowed very hard, and, besides, the wind was so high as to throw him twice from his horse. Night came on, and he feared he should die of cold and hunger, or to be torn to pieces by the wolves that he heard howling round him. All at once he cast his eyes toward a long avenue, and saw at the end a light, but it seemed a great way off. He made the best of his way toward it, and found that it came from a splendid palace, the windows of which were all blazing with light. It had great bronze gates, standing wide opened, and fine courtyards, through which the merchant passed, but not a living soul was to be seen. There were stables, too, which his poor starved horse, less scrupulous than himself, entered at once, and took a good meal of oats and hay. His master then tied him up and walked toward the entrance hall, but still without seeing a single creature. He went on to a large dining parlour, where he found a good fire and table covered with some very nice dishes, but only one plate, with a knife and fork. As the snow and rain had wetted him to the skin, he went up to the fire to dry himself. "I hope," said he, "the master of the house or his servants will excuse me, for it surely will not be long now before I see them." He waited some time, but still nobody came. At last the clock struck 11, and the merchant, being quite faint for the want of food, helped himself to a chicken and to a few glasses of wine, yet all the time trembling with fear. He sat till the clock struck 12, and then, taking courage, began to think he might as well look about him. So he opened a door at the end of the hall, and went through it to a very grand room, in which there was a fine bed, and as he was feeling very weary, he shut the door, took off his clothes, and got into it. It was 10 o'clock in the morning before he awoke, when he was amazed to see a handsome new suit of clothes laid ready for him, instead of his own, which were all torn and spoiled. "To be sure," said he to himself, "this place belongs to some good fairy, who has taken pity on my ill luck." He looked out of the window, and instead of the snow-covered wood, where he had lost himself the previous night, he saw the most charming arbours, covered with all kinds of flowers. Returning to the hall where he had supper, he found a breakfast table, ready prepared. "Indeed, my good fairy," said the merchant aloud, "I am vastly obliged to you for your kind care of me." He then made a hearty breakfast, took his hat, and was going to the stable to pay his horse a visit, but as he passed under one of the arbours, which was loaded with roses, he thought of what Beauty had asked him to bring back to her, and so he took a bunch of roses to carry home. At the same moment he heard a loud noise, and saw coming toward him a beast, so frightful to look at that he was ready to faint with fear. "Ungrateful man," said the beast in a terrible voice, "I have saved your life by admitting you into my palace, and in return you steal my roses, which I value more than anything I possess. But you shall atone for your fault, die in a quarter of an hour." The merchant fell on his knees, and clasping his hands, said, "Sir, I humbly beg your pardon. I did not think it would offend you to gather a rose for one of my daughters, who had entreated me to bring her one home. Do not kill me, my lord." "I am not a lord, but a beast," replied the monster. I hate false compliments, so do not fancy that you can coax me by any such ways. You tell me that you have daughters. Now I will suffer you to escape if one of them will come and die in your stead. If not, profuse that you will yourself return in 3 months, to be dealt with as I may choose." The tender-hearted merchant had no thoughts of letting any one of his daughters die for his sake, but he knew that if he seemed to accept the beast's terms, he should at least have the pleasure of seeing them once again. So he gave his promise, and was told that he might set off as soon as he liked. "But," said the beast, "I do not wish you to go back empty-handed. Go to the room you slept in, and you will find a chest there. Fill it with whatsoever you like best, and I will have it taken to your own house for you." When the beast had said this, he went away. The good merchant, left to himself, began to consider that as he must die, for he had no thought of breaking a promise, made even to a beast, he might as well have the comfort of leaving his children provided for. He returned to the room he had slept in, and found there heaps of gold pieces lying about. He filled the chest with them to the very brim, locked it, and mounting his horse, left the palace as sorrowful as he had been glad when he first beheld it. The horse took a path across the forest of his own accord, and in a few hours they reached the merchant's house. His children came running round him, but instead of kissing them with his joy, he could not help weeping as he looked at them. He held in his hand the bunch of roses, which he gave to Beauty, saying, "Take these roses, Beauty, but little do you think how dear they have cost your poor father." And then he gave them an account of all that he had seen or heard in the palace of the beast. The 2 eldest sisters now began to shed tears, and to lay the blame upon Beauty, who they said would be the cause of her father's death. "See," said they, "for what happens from the pride of the little wretch. Why did she not ask for such things as we did? But, to be sure, Miss must not be like other people, and though she will be the cause of her father's death, yet she does not shed a tear." "It would be useless," replied Beauty, "for my father shall not die. As the beast will accept one of his daughters, I will give myself up, and be only too happy to prove my love for the best of fathers." "No, sister," said the 3 brothers with one voice. "That cannot be. We will go in search of this monster, and either he or we will perish." "Do not hope to kill him," said the merchant. "His power is far too great. But Beauty's young life shall not be sacrificed. I am old, and cannot expect to live much longer, so I shall but give up a few years of my life, and shall only grieve for the sake of my children." "Never, father," cried Beauty. "If you go back to the palace, you cannot hinder my going after you. Though young, I am not over fond of life, and I would much rather be eaten up by the monster than die of grief for your loss." The merchant tried in vain to reason with Beauty, who still obstinately kept to her purpose, which, in truth, made her 2 sisters glad, for they were jealous of her, because everybody loved her. The merchant was so grieved at the thoughts of losing his child that he never once thought of the chest filled with gold. But at night, to his great surprise, he found it standing by his bedside. He said nothing about his riches to his eldest daughters, for he knew very well it would at once make them want to return to town. But he told Beauty his secret, and she then said that while he was away, the 2 gentlemen had been on a visit at her cottage, who had fallen in love with her 2 sisters. She entreated her father to marry them without delay, for she was so sweet-natured, she only wished them to be happy. 3 months went by only too fast, and then the merchant and Beauty got ready to set out for the palace of the beast. Upon this the 2 sisters rubbed their eyes with an onion, to make believe they were crying. Both the merchant and his sons cried in earnest. Only Beauty shed no tears. They reached the palace in a few hours, and the horse, without bidding, went into the stable as before. The merchant and Beauty walked toward the large hall, where they found a table covered with every dainty, and 2 plates laid already. The merchant had very little appetite, but Beauty, that she might the better hide her grief, placed herself at the table and helped her father. She then began to eat herself, and thought all the time that, to be sure, the beast had a mind to fatten her before he ate her up, since he had provided such good cheer for her. When they had done their supper, they heard a great noise, and the good old man began to bid his poor child farewell, for he knew it was the beast coming to them. When Beauty first saw that frightful form, she was very much terrified, but tried to hide her fear. The creature walked up to her and eyed her all over, then asked her in a dreadful voice if she had come quite of her own accord. "Yes," said Beauty. "Then you are a good girl, and I am very much obliged to you." This was such an astonishingly civil answer that Beauty's courage rose, but it sank again when the beast, addressing the merchant, desired him to leave the palace the next morning, and never return to it again. "And so good night, merchant, and good night, Beauty." "Good night, beast," she answered, as the monster shuffled out of the room. "Ah, my dear child," said the merchant, kissing his daughter, "I am half dead already, at the thought of leaving you with this dreadful beast. You shall go back and let me stay in your place." "No," said Beauty, boldly, "I will never agree to that. You must go home tomorrow morning." They then wished each other good night and went to bed, both of them thinking they should not be able to close their eyes. But as soon as ever they had lain down, they fell into a deep sleep, and did not awake till morning. Beauty dreamed that a lady came up to her, who said, "I am very much pleased, Beauty, with the goodness you have shown, in being willing to give your life to save that of your father. Do not be afraid of anything. You shall not go without a reward." As soon as Beauty awoke, she told her father this dream. But though it gave him some comfort, he was a long time before he could be persuaded to leave the palace. At last Beauty succeeded in getting him safely away. When her father was out of sight, poor Beauty began to weep sorely. Still, having naturally a courageous spirit, she soon resolved not to make her sad case still worse by sorrow, which she knew was vain, but to wait and be patient. She walked about to take a view of all the palace, and the elegance of every part of it much charmed her. But what was her surprise when she came to a door on which was written, "Beauty's room." She opened it in haste, and her eyes were dazzled by the splendor and taste of the apartment. What made her wonder more than all the rest was a large library filled with books, a harpsichord, and many pieces of music. "The beast surely does not mean to eat me up immediately," she said, "since he takes care I shall not be at a loss how to amuse myself." She opened the library and saw these verses written in letters of gold in the back of one of the books. "Beauteous lady, dry your tears. Here's no cause for sighs or fears. Command as freely as you may, for you command, and I obey." "Alas," said she, sighing, "I wish I could only command a sight of my poor father, and to know what he is doing at this moment." Just then, by chance, she cast her eyes upon a looking-glass that stood near her, and in it she saw a picture of her old home, and her father riding mournfully up to the door. Her sisters came out to meet him, and although they tried to look sorry, it was easy to see that in their hearts they were very glad. In a short time all this picture disappeared, but it caused Beauty to think that the beast, besides being very powerful, was also very kind. About the middle of the day she found a table laid ready for her, and a sweet concert of music played all the time she was dining, without her seeing anybody. But at supper, when she was going to seat herself at the table, she heard the noise of the beast, and could not help trembling with fear. "Beauty," said he, "will you give me leave to see you sup?" "That is as you please," answered she, very much afraid. "Not in the least," said the beast. "You alone command in this place. If you should not like my company, you need only say so, and I will leave you at that moment. But tell me, Beauty, do you not think me very ugly?" "Why, yes," said she, "for I cannot tell a falsehood. But then I think you are very good." "Am I?" sadly replied the beast. "Yet besides being ugly, I am also very stupid. I know well enough that I am but a beast." "Very stupid people," said Beauty, "are never aware of it themselves." At which kindly speech the beast looked pleased, and replied, not without an awkward sort of politeness, "Pray do not let me detain you from supper, and be sure that you are well served. All you see is your own, and I should be deeply grieved if you wanted for anything." "You are very kind, so kind that I almost forgot you are so ugly," said Beauty earnestly. "Ah, yes," answered the beast with a great sigh. "I hope I am good-tempered, but still I am only a monster. There is many a monster who wears the form of a man. It is better of the two to have the heart of a man and the form of a monster." "I would thank you, Beauty, for this speech, but I am too senseless to say anything that would please you," returned the beast in a melancholy voice. And altogether he seemed so gentle and so unhappy that Beauty, who had the tenderest heart in the world, felt her fear of him gradually vanish. She ate her supper with a good appetite, and conversed in her own sensible and charming way, till at last, when the beast arose to depart, he terrified her more than ever by saying abruptly in his gruff voice, "Beauty, will you marry me?" Now Beauty, frightened as she was, would speak only the exact truth. Besides, her father had told her that the beast liked only to have the truth spoken to him. So she answered in a very firm tone, "No, beast." He did not get into a passion or do anything but sigh deeply and depart. When Beauty found herself alone, she began to feel pity for the poor beast. "Oh," said she, "what a sad thing it is that he should be so very frightful, since he is so good-tempered." Beauty lived 3 months in this palace very well pleased. The beast came to see her every night, and talked with her while she supped. And though what he said was not very clever, yet, as she saw in him every day some new goodness, instead of dreading the time of his coming, she soon began continually looking at her watch, to see if it were 9 o'clock, for that was the hour when he never failed to visit her. One thing only vexed her, which was that every night before he went away, he always made it a rule to ask her if she would be his wife, and seemed very much grieved at her steadfastly replying no. At last one night she said to him, "You wound me greatly, beast, by forcing me to refuse you so often. I wish I could take such a liking to you as to agree to marry you, but I must tell you plainly that I do not think it will ever happen. I shall always be your friend, so try to let that content you." "I must," sighed the beast, "for I know well enough how frightful I am. But I love you better than myself. Yet I think I am very lucky in your being pleased to stay with me. Now promise, Beauty, that you will never leave me." Beauty would almost have agreed to this, so sorry was she for him, but she had that day seen in her magic glass, which she looked at constantly, that her father was dying of grief for her sake. "Alas," she said, "I long so much to see my father, that if you do not give me leave to visit him, I shall break my heart." "I would rather break mine, Beauty," answered the beast. "I will send you to your father's cottage. You shall stay there, and your poor beast shall die of sorrow." "No," said Beauty, crying. "I love you too well to be the cause of your death. I promise to return in a week. You have shown me that my sisters are married, and my brothers are gone for soldiers, so that my father is left all alone. Let me stay a week with him." "You shall find yourself with him tomorrow morning," replied the beast. "But mind, do not forget your promise. When you wish to return, you have nothing to do but to put your ring on a table when you go to bed. Goodbye, Beauty." The beast sighed as he said these words, and Beauty went to bed very sorry to see him so much grieved. When she awoke in the morning, she found herself in her father's cottage. She rang a bell that was at her bedside, and a servant entered, but as soon as she saw Beauty, the woman gave a loud shriek, upon which the merchant ran upstairs. And when he beheld his daughter, he ran to her, and kissed her 100 times. At last Beauty began to remember that she had brought no clothes with her to put on, but the servant told her she had just found in the next room a large chest full of dresses, trimmed all over with gold and adorned with pearls and diamonds. Beauty, in her own mind, thanked the beast for his kindness, and put on the plainest gown she could find among them all. She then desired the servant to lay the rest aside, for she intended to give them to her sisters. But as soon as she had spoken these words, the chest was gone, out of sight in a moment. Her father then suggested perhaps the beast chose for her to keep them all for herself, and as soon as he had said this, they saw the chest standing again in the same place. While Beauty was dressing herself, a servant brought word to her that her sisters were coming with their husbands to pay her a visit. They both lived unhappily with the gentleman they had married. The husband of the eldest was very handsome, but was so proud of this that he thought of nothing else from morning till night, and did not care a pin for the beauty of his wife. The second had married a man of great learning, but he made no use of it, except to torment and affront all his friends, and his wife more than any of them. The two sisters were ready to burst with spite when they saw Beauty dressed like a princess, and looking so very charming. All the kindness that she showed them was of no use, for they were vexed more than ever when she told them how happy she lived at the palace of the beast. The spiteful creatures went by themselves into the garden, where they cried to think of her good fortune. "Why should the little wretch be better off than we?" said they. "We are much handsomer than she is." "Sister," said the eldest, "a thought has just come into my head. Let us try to keep her here longer than the week for which the beast gave her leave, and then he will be so angry that perhaps when she goes back to him he will eat her up in a moment." "That is well thought of," answered the other, "but to do this we must pretend to be very kind." They then went to join her in the cottage, where they showed her so much false love that Beauty could not help crying for joy. When the week was ended, the two sisters began to pretend such grief at the thought of her leaving them that she agreed to stay a week more. But all that time Beauty could not help fretting for the sorrow that she knew her absence would give her poor beast, for she tenderly loved him, and much wished for his company again. Among all the grand and clever people she saw, she found nobody who was half so sensible, so affectionate, so thoughtful, or so kind. The 10th night of her being at the cottage, she dreamed she was in the garden of the palace, that the beast lay dying on a grass plot, and with his last breath put her in mind of her promise, and laid his death to her forsaking him. Beauty awoke in a great fright, and she burst into tears. "Am not I wicked," said she, "to behave so ill to a beast who has shown me so much kindness? Why will I not marry him? I am sure I should be more happy with him than my sisters are with their husbands. He shall not be wretched any longer on my account, for I should do nothing but blame myself all the rest of my life." She then rose, put her ring on the table, and got into bed again, and soon fell asleep. In the morning she with joy found herself in the palace of the beast. She dressed herself very carefully, that she might please him the better, and thought she had never known a day pass away so slowly. At last the clock struck 9, but the beast did not come. Beauty, dreading lest she might truly have caused his death, ran from room to room, calling out, "Beast! Dear beast!" But there was no answer. At last she remembered her dream, rushed to the grass plot, and there saw him lying apparently dead beside the fountain. Forgetting all his ugliness, she threw herself upon his body, and finding his heart still beating, she fetched some water and sprinkled it over him, weeping and sobbing the while. The beast opened his eyes. "You forgot your promise, Beauty, and so I determined to die, for I could not live without you. I have starved myself to death, but I shall die content, since I have seen your face once more." "No, dear beast," cried Beauty passionately. "You shall not die. You shall live to be my husband. I thought it was only friendship I felt for you, but now I know it was love. The moment Beauty had spoken these words, the palace was suddenly lighted up, and all kinds of rejoicings were heard around them, none of which she noticed, but hung over her dear beast with the utmost tenderness. At last, unable to restrain herself, she dropped her head over her hands, covered her eyes, and cried for joy. And when she looked up again, the beast was gone. In his stead she saw at her feet a handsome, graceful young prince, who thanked her with the tenderest expressions for having freed him from enchantment. "But where is my poor beast? I only want him and nobody else," sobbed Beauty. "I am he," replied the prince. "A wicked fairy condemned me to this form, and forbade me to show that I had any wit or sense, till a beautiful lady should consent to marry me. You alone, dearest Beauty, judged me neither by my looks nor my talents, but by my heart alone. Take it then, and all that I have besides, for all is yours." Beauty, full of surprise, but very happy, suffered the prince to lead her to his palace, where she found her father and sisters, who had been brought there by the fairy lady, whom she had seen in a dream the first night she came. "Beauty," said the fairy, "you have chosen well, and you have your reward, for a true heart is better than either good looks or clever brains. As for you, ladies," she said, turned to the two eldest sisters, "I know all your ill deeds, but I have no worse punishment for you than to see your sister happy. You shall stand as statues at the door of her palace, and when you repent of and have amended your faults, you shall become women again. But, to tell you the truth, I very much fear you will remain statues forever." End of chapter 83.
Chapter 84 of the Junior Classics, Volume 1 by William Patton. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Chapter 84, Jack and the Beanstalk. Author, Anonymous. Once upon a time, there was a poor widow who lived in a little cottage with her only son, Jack. Jack was a giddy, thoughtless boy, but very kind-hearted and affectionate. There had been a hard winter, and after it the poor woman had suffered from fever and ague. Jack did no work as yet, and by degrees they grew dreadfully poor. The widow saw that there was no means of keeping Jack and herself from starvation but by selling her cow. So one morning she said to her son, "I am too weak to go out myself, Jack, so you must take the cow to market for me and sell her." Jack liked going to market to sell the cow very much, but as he was on his way he met a butcher who had some beautiful beans in his hand. Jack stopped to look at them, and the butcher told the boy that they were of great value and persuaded the silly lad to sell the cow for these beans. When he brought them home to his mother instead of the money she expected for her nice cow, she was very vexed and shed many tears, scolding Jack for his folly. He was very sorry, and mother and son went to bed very sadly that night. Their last hopes seemed gone. At daybreak, Jack rose and went out into the garden. "At least," he thought, "I will sow the wonderful beans. Mother says that they are just common scarlet runners and nothing else, but I may as well sow them." So he took a piece of stick and made some holes in the ground and put in the beans. That day they had very little dinner and went sadly to bed, knowing that for the next day there would be none, and Jack, unable to sleep from grief and vexation, got up at day-dawn and went out into the garden. What was his amazement to find that the beans had grown up in the night and climbed up and up till they covered the high cliff that sheltered the cottage and disappeared above it. The stalks had twined and twisted themselves together till they formed quite a ladder. "It would be easy to climb it," thought Jack. and having thought of the experiment, he at once resolved to carry it out, for Jack was a good climber. However, after his late mistake about the cow, he thought he had better consult his mother first. So Jack called his mother, and they both gazed in silent wonder at the beanstalk, which was not only of great height, but was thick enough to bear Jack's weight. "I wonder where it ends," said Jack to his mother. "I think I will climb up and see." His mother wished him not to venture up this strange ladder, but Jack coaxed her to give her consent to the attempt, for he was certain there must be something wonderful in the beanstalk, so at last she yielded to his wishes. Jack instantly began to climb, and went up and up on the ladder-like beam till everything he had left behind him, the cottage, the village, and even the tall church tower, looked quite little, and still he could not see the top of the beanstalk. Jack felt a little tired, and thought for a moment that he would go back again. But he was a very persevering boy, and he knew that the way to succeed in anything is not to give up. So after resting for a moment, he went on. After climbing higher and higher till he grew afraid to look down for fear he should be giddy, Jack at last reached the top of the beanstalk, and found himself in a beautiful country, finely wooded, with beautiful meadows covered with sheep. A crystal stream ran through the pastures. Not far from the place where he had got off the beanstalk stood a fine, strong castle. Jack wondered very much that he had never heard of or seen this castle before, but when he reflected on the subject, he saw that it was as much separated from the village by the perpendicular rock on which it stood as if it were in another land. While Jack was standing looking at the castle, a very strange-looking woman came out of the wood and advanced toward him. She wore a pointed cap of quilted red satin turned up with ermine, her hair streamed loose over her shoulders, and she walked with a staff. Jack took off his cap and made her a bow. "If you please, ma'am," said he, "is this your house?" "No," said the old lady. "Listen, and I will tell you the story of that castle. Once upon a time there was a noble knight who lived in this castle, which is on the borders of fairyland. He had a fair and beloved wife and several lovely children, and as his neighbors, the little people, were very friendly toward him, they bestowed on him many excellent and precious gifts. Rumor whispered of these treasures, and a monstrous giant who lived at a great distance, and who was a very wicked being, resolved to obtain possession of them. So he bribed a false servant to let him inside the castle, when the knight was in bed and asleep, and he killed him as he lay. Then he went to the part of the castle which was the nursery, and also killed all the poor little ones he found there. Happily for her, the lady was not to be found. She had gone with her infant son, who was only 2 or 3 months old, to visit her old nurse, who lived in the valley, and she had been detained all night there by a storm. The next morning, as soon as it was light, one of the servants at the castle, who had managed to escape, came to tell the poor lady of the sad fate of her husband and her pretty babes. She could scarcely believe him at first, and was eager at once to go back and share the fate of her dear ones. But the old nurse, with many tears, besought her to remember that she had still a child, and that it was her duty to preserve her life for the sake of the poor innocent. The lady yielded to this reasoning, and consented to remain at her nurse's house as the best place of concealment, for the servant told her that the giant had vowed if he could find her, he would kill both her and her baby. Years rolled on. The old nurse died, leaving her cottage and the few articles of furniture it contained to her poor lady, who dwelt in it, working as a peasant for her daily bread. Her spinning wheel and the milk of a cow which she had purchased with the little money she had with her sufficed for the scanty subsistence of herself and her little son. There was a nice little garden attached to the cottage, in which they cultivated peas, beans, and cabbages, and the lady was not ashamed to go out at the harvest time and glean in the fields to supply her little son's wants. "Jack, that poor lady is your mother. This castle was once your father's, and must again be yours." Jack uttered a cry of surprise. "My mother? Oh, madam, what ought I to do? My poor father, my dear mother?" "Your duty requires you to win it back for your mother, but the task is a very difficult one and full of peril, Jack. Have you courage to undertake it?" "I fear nothing when I am doing right," said Jack. "Then," said the lady in the red cap, "you are one of those who slays giants. You must get into the castle, and if possible, possess yourself of a hen that lays golden eggs and a harp that talks. Remember, all the giant possesses is really yours." As she ceased speaking, the lady of the red hat suddenly disappeared, and of course Jack knew she was a fairy. Jack determined at once to attempt the adventure, so he advanced and blew the horn which hung at the castle portal. The door was opened in a minute or two by a frightful giantess with one great eye in the middle of her forehead. As soon as Jack saw her, he turned to run away, but she caught him and dragged him into the castle. "Ho, ho!" she laughed terribly. "You didn't expect to see me here, that is clear. No, I shan't let you go again. I am weary of my life. I am so overworked, and I don't see why I should not have a page as well as other ladies, and you shall be my boy. You shall clean the knives and black the boots and make the fires and help me generally when the giant is out. When he is at home, I must hide you, for he has eaten up all my pages hitherto, and you would be a dainty morsel, my little lad." While she spoke, she dragged Jack right into the castle. The poor boy was very much frightened, as I am sure you and I would have been in his place, but he remembered that fear disgraces a man, so he struggled to be brave and make the best of things. "I am quite ready to help you and do all I can to serve you, madame," he said. "Only I beg you will be good enough to hide me from your husband, for I should not like to be eaten at all." "That's a good boy," said the giantess, nodding her head. "It is lucky for you that you did not scream out when you saw me, as the other boys who have been here did. For if you had done so, my husband would have awakened and have eaten you, as he did them, for breakfast. Come here, child. Go into my wardrobe. He never ventures to open that. You will be safe there." And she opened a huge wardrobe which stood in the great hall and shut him unto it. But the keyhole was so large that it admitted plenty of air, and he could see everything that took place through it. By and by he heard a heavy tramp on the stairs, like the lumbering along of a great cannon, and then a voice like thunder cried out,
"Fee-faw-fi-fo-fum. I smell the breath of an Englishman. Let him be alive or let him be dead, I'll grind his bones to make my bread." "Wife!"
cried the giant.
"There is a man in the castle. Let me have him for breakfast."
"You are grown old and stupid," cried the lady in her loud tones. "It is only a nice fresh steak off an elephant that I have cooked for you, which you smell. There, sit down and make a good breakfast." And she placed a huge dish before him of savory steaming meat, which greatly pleased him and made him forget his idea of an Englishman being in the castle. When he had breakfasted, he went out for a walk, and then the giantess opened the door and made Jack come out to help her. He helped her all day. She fed him well, and when evening came, put him back in the wardrobe. The giant came to supper. Jack watched him through the keyhole and was amazed to see him pick a wolf's bone and put half a fowl at a time into his capacious mouth. When the supper was ended, he bade his wife bring him his hen that laid the golden eggs.
"It lays as well as it did when it belonged to that paltry knight,"
he said.
"Indeed, I think the eggs are heavier than ever."
The giantess went away and soon returned with a little brown hen, which she placed on the table before her husband. "And now, my dear," she said, "I'm going for a walk, if you don't want me any longer."
"Go,"
said the giant.
"I shall be glad to have a nap by and by."
Then he took up the brown hen and said to her,
"Lay!"
And she instantly laid a golden egg.
"Lay!"
said the giant again, and she laid another.
"Lay!"
He repeated the third time, and again a golden egg lay on the table. Now Jack was sure this hen was that of which the fairy had spoken. By and by the giant put the hen down on the floor, and soon after went fast asleep, snoring so loud that it sounded like thunder. Directly Jack perceived that the giant was fast asleep, he pushed open the door of the wardrobe and crept out very softly. He stole across the room, and picking up the hen, made haste to quit the apartment. He knew the way to the kitchen, the door of which he found was left ajar. He opened it, shut and locked it after him, and flew back to the beanstalk, which he descended as fast as his feet would move. When his mother saw him enter the house, she wept for joy, for she had feared that the fairies had carried him away, or that the giant had found him. But Jack put the brown hen down before her, and told her how he had been in the giant's castle and all his adventures. She was very glad to see the hen, which would make them rich once more. Jack made another journey up the beanstalk to the giant's castle one day while his mother had gone to market. But first he dyed his hair and disguised himself. The old woman did not know him again, and dragged him in as she had done before to help her do the work. But she heard her husband coming, and hid him in the wardrobe, not thinking that it was the same boy who had stolen the hen. She bade him stay quite still there, or the giant would eat him. Then the giant came in, saying,
"Fee, faw, fi, fo, fum. I smell the breath of an Englishman. Let him be alive or let him be dead. I'll grind his bones to make my bread."
"Nonsense," said the wife. "It is only a roasted bullock that I thought would be a tidbit for your supper. Sit down, and I will bring it up at once." The giant sat down, and soon his wife brought up a roasted bullock on a large dish, and they began their supper. Jack was amazed to see them pick the bones of the bullock as if it had been a lark. As soon as they had finished their meal, the giantess rose and said, "Now, my dear, with your leave, I am going up to my room to finish the story I am reading. If you want me, call for me."
"First,"
answered the giant,
"bring me my money bags, that I may count my golden pieces before I sleep."
The giantess obeyed. She went and soon returned with 2 large bags over her shoulders, which she put down by her husband. "There," she said, "that is all that is left of the night's money. When you have spent it, you must go and take another baron's castle." "That he shan't, if I can help it," thought Jack. The giant, when his wife was gone, took out heaps and heaps of golden pieces and counted them, and put them in piles, till he was tired of the amusement. Then he swept them all back into their bags, and, leaning back in his chair, fell fast asleep, snoring so loud that no other sound was audible. Jack stole softly out of the wardrobe, and, taking up the bags of money, which were his very own, because the giant had stolen them from his father, he ran off, and, with great difficulty descending the beanstalk, laid the bags of gold on his mother's table. She had just returned from town, and was crying at not finding Jack. "There, mother, I have brought you the gold that my father lost." "Oh, Jack, you are a very good boy, but I wish you would not risk your precious life in the giant's castle. Tell me how you came to go there again." And Jack told her all about it. Jack's mother was very glad to get the money, but she did not like him to run any risk for her. But after a time Jack made up his mind to go again to the giant's castle. So he climbed the beanstalk once more and blew the horn at the giant's gate. The giantess soon opened the door. She was very stupid and did not know him again, but she stopped a minute before she took him in. She feared another robbery, but Jack's fresh face looked so innocent that she could not resist him, and so she bade him come in and again hid him away in the wardrobe. By and by the giant came home, and as soon as he had crossed the threshold, he roared out,
"Fee, fa, lie, fo, fum. I smell the breath of an Englishman. Let him be alive, or let him be dead. I'll grind his bones to make my bread."
"You stupid old giant," said his wife. "You only smell a nice sheep, which I have grilled for your dinner." And the giant sat down, and his wife brought up a whole sheep for his dinner. When he had eaten it all up, he said,
"Now, bring me my harp, and I will have a little music while you take your walk."
The giantess obeyed, and returned with a beautiful harp. The framework was all sparkling with diamonds and rubies, and the strings were all of gold.
"This is one of the nicest things I took from the knight,"
said the giant.
"I am very fond of music, and my harp is a faithful servant."
So he drew the harp toward him and said,
"Play."
And the harp played a very soft, sad air.
"Play something merrier,"
said the giant, and the harp played a merry tune.
"Now, play me a lullaby,"
roared the giant, and the harp played a sweet lullaby, to the sound of which its master fell asleep. Then Jack stole softly out of the wardrobe and went into the huge kitchen to see if the giantess had gone out. He found no one there, so he went to the door and opened it softly, for he thought he could not do so with the harp in his hand. Then he entered the giant's room and seized the harp and ran away with it. But as he jumped over the threshold, the harp called out, "Master! Master!" And the giant woke up. With a tremendous roar he sprang from his seat, and in 2 strides he had reached the door. But Jack was very nimble. He fled like lightning with the harp, talking to it as he went, for he saw it was a fairy, and telling it he was the son of its old master, the knight. Still, the giant came on so fast that he was quite close to poor Jack, and had stretched out his great hand to catch him. But luckily, just at that moment he stepped upon a loose stone, stumbled, and fell flat on the ground, where he lay at his full length. This accident gave Jack time to get to the beanstalk and hasten down it. But just as he reached their own garden, he beheld the giant descending after him. "Mother, mother!" cried Jack. "Make haste and give me the axe." His mother ran to him with a hatchet in her hand, and Jack, with one tremendous blow, cut through all the beanstalks except one. "Now, mother, stand out of the way," said he. Jack's mother shrank back, and it was well she did so, for just as the giant took hold of the last branch of the beanstalk, Jack cut the stem quite through and darted from the spot. Down came the giant with a terrible crash, and as he fell on his head he broke his neck and lay dead at the feet of the woman he had so much injured. Before Jack and his mother had recovered from their alarm and agitation, a beautiful lady stood before them. "Jack," said she, "you have acted like a brave knight's son and deserve to have your inheritance restored to you. dig a grave and bury the giant, and then go and kill the giantess." "But," said Jack, "I could not kill anyone unless I were fighting with him, and I could not draw my sword upon a woman. Moreover, the giantess was very kind to me." The fairy smiled on Jack. "I am very much pleased with your generous feeling," she said. "Nevertheless, return to the castle and act as you will find needful." Jack asked the fairy if she would show him the way to the castle, as the beanstalk was now down. She told him that she would drive him there in her chariot, which was drawn by 2 peacocks. Jack thanked her and sat down in the chariot with her. The fairy drove him a long distance round till they reached a village which lay at the bottom of the mill. Here they found a number of miserable-looking men assembled. The fairy stopped her carriage and addressed them. "My friends," said she, "the cruel giant who oppressed you and ate up all your flocks and herds is dead, and this young gentleman was the means of your being delivered from him, and is the son of your kind old master, the knight." The men gave a loud cheer at these words, and pressed forward to say that they would serve Jack as faithfully as they had served his father. The fairy bade them follow her to the castle, and they marched thither in a body, and Jack blew the horn and demanded admittance. The old giantess saw them coming from the turret loophole. She was very much frightened, for she guessed that something had happened to her husband, and as she came downstairs very fast she caught her foot in her dress, and fell from the top to the bottom, and broke her neck. When the people outside found that the door was not open to them, they took crowbars and forced the portal. Nobody was to be seen, but on leaving the mall they found the body of the giantess at the foot of the stairs. Thus Jack took possession of the castle. The fairy went and brought his mother to him with the hen and the harp. He had the giantess buried, and endeavored as much as lay in his power to do right to those whom the giant had robbed. Before her departure for Fairyland, the fairy explained to Jack that she had sent the butcher to meet him with the beans, in order to try what sort of lad he was. "If you had looked at the gigantic beanstalk, and only stupidly wondered about it," she said, "I should have left you where misfortune had placed you, only restoring her cow to your mother. But you showed an inquiring mind and great courage and enterprise. Therefore you deserve to rise, and when you mounted the beanstalk, you climbed the ladder of fortune." She then took her leave of Jack and his mother. End of chapter. This recording by Sean McGahey, Midland, Ontario, Canada. www.ducttapeguy.net.
This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to find out how to volunteer, visit LibriVox.org. The Junior Classics by William Peyton, Volume 1. Chapter 85, Hop o' My Thumb, retold by Joseph Jacobs. Once upon a time there was a woodcutter and his wife who had 7 children, all boys. The eldest was only 10 years old. They were very poor, and their 7 children were a great burden, since not one of them was able to earn his living. What troubled them still more was the fact that the youngest was not only very delicate, but silent, which they took for stupidity, but which was really a mark of his good sense. He was very small, and when he was born he was scarcely bigger than one's thumb, which caused him to be called Little Hop-o'-my-Thumb. This poor child was the scapegoat of the house, and was blamed for everything. He was, however, sharper and wiser than all of his brothers, and though he spoke little, he listened a great deal. At last there came a bad year, and so great a famine that the poor people resolved to rid themselves of their children. One evening, when the children were all in bed, and the woodcutter, with a sorrowful heart, was sitting by the fire with his wife, he said to her, "You know that we can no longer support our children. I cannot let them die of hunger before my eyes, and I am resolved to take them to the wood tomorrow, and lose them. It will be easy to do this, for while they amuse themselves tying my sticks, we have only to slip away without their seeing us." "Ah!" cried his wife, "would you then destroy your children?" In vain did her husband set forth to her their great poverty. She would not consent. She was poor, she said, but she was their mother. At last, having considered what a grief it would be to her to have them die of hunger before her eyes, she agreed to her husband's plan and went weeping to bed. Hop-o'-my-Thumb had listened to all that they had said, for having heard them, from his bed, talking of family matters, he had risen softly and slipped under his father's stool, in order to hear without being seen. He then went back to bed, but lay awake the rest of the night, thinking what he should do. He rose early and went to a brook, where he filled his pocket with little white pebbles, and then returned to the house. Soon after they all set off, but Hop-o'-my-Thumb did not tell his brothers anything of what he knew. They went into a forest, so thick that they could not see each other at a distance of 10 paces. The woodcutter began to fell a tree, while the children gathered sticks to make up into bundles. The father and mother, seeing them thus employed, slipped away unnoticed, and then fled rapidly by a little winding path. When the children found they were alone, they began to scream and cry with all their strength. Hop-o'-my-Thumb let them cry, knowing well how to get home, for while walking he had dropped along the path the little white pebbles which he had in his pockets. He therefore said to them, "Fear not, brothers, my father and mother have left us here, but I will lead you to the house. Only follow me." They obeyed at once, and he led them home along the same path by which they had come into the forest at first. They did not dare go into the house, but placed themselves near the door, in order to hear what their father and mother were saying. Now, it had so happened that, just as the woodcutter and his wife reached home, the lord of the village had sent them 10 crowns, which he had long owed them, and which they had never hoped to obtain. This gave them new life, for the poor creatures were almost dead from hunger. The woodcutter immediately sent his wife to the butcher's, where, as it was long since they had eaten anything, she bought 3 times as much meat as was needed for the supper of 2 people. When they were seated at table, the wife said, "Alas, where now are our poor children? They would make good cheer with what we have left, but it is you who wish to lose them. I always said we should repent it. What are they doing now in the forest? Alas, alas, perhaps the wolves have already eaten them. You were most cruel thus to lose your children." The woodcutter at last grew impatient, for she repeated more than 20 times that they would repent what they had done, and that she had told him so. He threatened to beat her if she would not be silent. The woodcutter did not do this because he was less sorry than his wife, but because her reproaches angered him. His wife now shed tears, and cried out, "Alas, Where are my children, my poor children?" She said this so loud that the children, who were at the door, heard her, and all cried out together, "Here we are! Here we are!" She ran quickly to open the door, and said, as she embraced them, "How overjoyed I am to see you again, my darling children! You must be very tired and very hungry. And you, Peter, how muddy you are! Come, let me brush you." Peter was her eldest son, and she loved him more than all the others. The children then sat down at the table and ate with an appetite which delighted their father and mother, to whom they described, all speaking at once, how frightened they had been in the forest. These good people were filled with joy to have their children with them again, and this joy lasted as long as the 10 crowns held out. But when the money was spent, they fell back into their former misery, and resolved to lose them once more. And in order not to fail again, they determined to take them much further into the forest than the first time. They could not, however, speak of this so secretly, but that they were overheard by Hop-o'-my-Thumb, who laid his plans to escape as before. Although he got up early in order to go out and pick up some little stones, he could not succeed in his purpose, for he found the door of the house shut and double bolted. He was wondering what he should do, when his mother, having given them each a bit of bread for breakfast, he thought that he might use his bread instead of pebbles by dropping crumbs along the paths as they walked. He therefore slipped the bread into his pocket. Their father and mother led them this time into the thickest and darkest part of the forest, and as soon as they were there, ran away and left them. Hop-o'-my-Thumb was not much troubled, because he believed he could easily find his way by means of the bread which he had scattered as he passed along. What was his surprise when he could not find a single crumb! The birds had come and eaten it all. Now was their lot indeed wretched. The more they wandered about, the deeper they buried themselves in the forest. Night came, and a great wind arose, which frightened them terribly. They thought they heard on all sides the howling of hungry wolves coming to eat them up. They did not dare to speak, or even turn their heads. Rain began to fall, which wet them to the skin. They slipped at every step, and, if they fell, got up so covered with mud that they could hardly move their hands. Finally, Hop-o'-my-Thumb climbed to the top of a tree, to see if he could not discover something. Having looked on all sides, he at last saw a little gleam of light, like that from a candle, but it was very far off, beyond the forest. He got down from the tree, but when he was on the ground he no longer saw anything, which troubled him greatly. However, having walked for some time with his brothers in the direction where he had seen the light, he again saw it as they came out of the wood. At last they reached the house where the candle was, though not without many alarms, for they lost sight of it whenever they descended into a hollow place. They knocked at the door, which was opened by a woman. She asked them what they wanted. Hop-o'-my-Thumb replied that they were poor children who had lost themselves in the forest, and who asked for charity's sake a place to sleep. The woman, seeing how bitter they were, began to weep, and said to them, "Alas, my poor children, whence do you come? Do you not know that this is the house of an ogre who eats little children?" "Alas, madam," said Hop-o'-my-Thumb, who, like his brothers, was shaking with fear. "What shall we do? The wolves of the forest will certainly devour us tonight, if you will not give us shelter. This being the case, we had rather be eaten by the ogre, and he perhaps will take pity on us if you will beg him to do so." The ogre's wife, who thought she might be able to conceal them from her husband till the next morning, let them come in, and placed them near a good fire, where a whole sheep was roasting for the ogre's supper. When they had begun to get warm, they heard 3 or 4 knocks at the door. It was the ogre. His wife hastily hid the children under the bed, and then opened the door. The ogre asked first if supper was ready, and the wine drawn, and then sat down at the table. The mutton was nearly raw, but he liked it all the better on that account. He then began to sniff about, saying that he smelled fresh meat. "It must be this calf which I have been dressing that you smell," said the wife. "I smell fresh meat, I tell you again," said the ogre, looking fiercely at his wife, "and there is something more of which I do not know." Saying these words, he rose from the table and went straight to the bed, where he found the poor children. "Ah!" said he, "this, then, is the way you wish to deceive me? Wicked woman, I know not what prevents me from eating you too. Here is game, which comes to me very conveniently, to treat 3 ogres of my acquaintance, who are coming to visit me about this time." He then drew the little boys from under the bed, one after another. The poor children threw themselves on their knees, begging for pardon. But they had to do with the most cruel of all the ogres, who, far from having pity, devoured them already with his eyes, and said to his wife that they would be delicious morsels fried, when she had made a good sauce for them. He took out a great knife, and, approaching the poor children, began to sharpen it on a long stone, which he held in his left hand. He then seized one of them, when his wife said to him, "Why do you begin at this time of night? Shall you not have time tomorrow?" "Be silent," replied the ogre. "They will be more tender if I kill them now." "But you already have so much meat on hand," replied his wife. "Here are a calf, 2 sheep, and half a pig." "You are right," said the ogre. "Give them a good supper, that they may not grow thin, and put them to bed." The good woman was overcome with joy, and brought them their supper at once, but they were too frightened to eat. As for the ogre, he set himself to drinking, delighted to have something with which to regale his friends. He drank a dozen cups more than usual, which went to his head, and obliged him to go early to bed. Now, this ogre had 7 daughters, who were still only children. These little ogresses all had beautiful complexions, for they ate fresh meat, like their father. They had little round gray eyes, crooked noses, and great mouths filled with long teeth, very sharp and far apart. They were not very wicked, but they promised well, for they already bit little children whenever they got the chance. They had been put to bed early, and were all 7 in one bed, each having a golden crown on her head. There was in the same room another bed of the same size. Here it was that the ogre's wife put the 7 little boys, after which she went to bed in her own chamber. Hop-o'-my-Thumb, who had remarked that the ogre's daughter had golden crowns on their heads, was afraid that the ogre might regret not having killed him and his brothers that evening, so he rose about the middle of the night, and taking his nightcap and those of his brothers, he went very softly and placed them on the heads of the ogre's 7 daughters, after having removed their golden crowns. He then put the crowns on his brothers' heads, and on his own, so that the ogre might mistake them for his daughters, and his daughters for the boys whom he wished to kill. The plan succeeded as he had expected. The ogre, having awakened about midnight, was sorry that he had put off till next day what he might have done that evening. He jumped quickly out of bed, and taking his great knife, "Let us see," said he, "how our little friends are getting on." He went on tiptoe to the room of his daughters, and approached the bed where the little boys were all asleep, except Hop-o'-my-Thumb, who was terribly frightened when he felt the ogre's hand touching his head, as he had already touched his brothers. But when the ogre felt the golden crowns, he said, "Indeed, I was near making a nice piece of work of it. I see I drank too much in the evening." He then went to the bed of his daughters, where he felt the boys' little nightcaps. "Ah, here they are," said he, "the fine fellows. I must go boldly to work." Saying these words, and without hesitating, he cut the throats of his 7 daughters. Very well pleased with his expedition, he went back to bed. As soon as Hop-o'-my-Thumb heard the ogre snoring, he awakened his brothers, and told them to dress themselves quickly and follow him. They went softly down into the garden, and leaped over the walls. They hurried away, and ran almost all night, without knowing whither they went. Then the ogre, when he woke up, said to his wife, "Go upstairs and dress those little fellows who were here last night." The ogress was very much astonished at the kindness of her husband, not suspecting for a moment the way in which he meant that she should dress them. Believing that he simply wished her to put on their clothes, he went upstairs, where she was amazed to see her 7 daughters with their throats cut. She was so overcome that she immediately fainted. The ogre, thinking his wife was too slow, went upstairs to assist her. He was no less astonished than his wife when the frightful sight met his eyes. "Ah, what have I done?" he cried. "But those little wretches shall pay for this, and at once." He then threw a bucket of water into his wife's face, and having revived her, said, "Give me quickly my 7-league boots, that I may go after those boys and catch 'em." He then started out into the country at once, and having rushed about in all directions, came at last to the road where the poor children were walking, and then not more than 100 steps from their father's house. They saw the ogre striding from mountain to mountain, and crossing rivers as if they were little brooks. Hop-o'-my-Thumb, who saw a hollow rock near the place where they were, hid himself and his 6 brothers there, and watched carefully what became of their enemy. The ogre, who was very tired with his long and fruitless journey, wished to rest himself, and sat down, by chance, on the very rock where the little boys were hidden. As he was overcome with fatigue, he soon fell asleep, and began to snore so frightfully that the poor children were as much frightened as when he had his knife ready to cut their throats. Hop-o'-my-Thumb was less afraid, and told his brothers to run into the house while the ogre slept, and not to worry about him. They followed his counsel, and quickly reached the house. Hop-o'-my-Thumb then approached the ogre, softly drew off his boots, and put them on himself. The boots were very long and very large, but as they were fairy boots, they had the gift of becoming larger or smaller according to the size of the wearer's leg. In fact, they fitted Hop-o'-my-Thumb as if they had been made for him. He then went straight to the ogre's house, where he found his wife weeping over her daughters. "Your husband," said Hop-o'-my-Thumb, "is in great danger, for he has been taken by a band of robbers who will kill him if he does not give them all his gold and silver. Just when they held their knives to his throat, he perceived me, and besought me to come and tell you of the state in which he was, and to direct you to give me all that he has, without retaining anything, since otherwise they would slay him without mercy. As time passed, he wished that I should take his 7-league boots, as you see, in order to make haste, and also that you might not think me an impostor. The good woman, very much frightened, gave him all she had, for this ogre was a good husband, although he did eat little children. Hop-o'-my-Thumb, being then loaded with all the ogre's treasures, returned to his father's house, where he was welcomed with great joy, and where they all lived happily ever after. End of chapter 85. Read by Dennis Sayers in Modesto, California for LibriVox, Summer 2006.
This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Junior Classics, Volume 1 by William Patton, Chapter 86, The Goose-Girl by Anonymous. There was once upon a time an old queen whose husband had been dead for many years, and she had a beautiful daughter. When the princess grew up, she was betrothed to a prince who lived at a great distance. When the time came for her to be married, and she had to journey forth into the distant kingdom, the aged queen packed up for her many costly vessels of silver and gold, and trinkets also of gold and silver, and cups and jewels, in short, everything which appertained to a royal dowry, for she loved her child with all her heart. She likewise sent her maid-in-waiting, who was to ride with her, and hand her over to the bridegroom, and each had a horse for the journey, but the horse of the king's daughter was called Falada, and could speak. So when the hour of parting had come, the aged mother went into her bedroom, took a small knife, and cut her finger with it until it bled. Then she held a white handkerchief to it, into which she let 3 drops of blood fall, gave it to her daughter, and said, "Dear child, preserve this carefully. It will be of service to you on your way." So they took a sorrowful leave of each other. The princess put the piece of cloth in her bosom, mounted her horse, and then went away to her bridegroom. After she had ridden for a while, she felt a burning thirst, and said to her waiting-maid, "Dismount, and take my cup which thou hast brought with thee for me, and get me some water from the stream, for I should like to drink." "If you are thirsty," said the waiting-maid. "Get off your horse yourself and lie down and drink out of the water. I don't choose to be your servant." So in her great thirst the princess alighted, bent down over the water in the stream and drank, and was not allowed to drink out of the golden cup. Then she said, "Ah, heaven!" And the 3 drops of blood answered, "If thy mother knew this, her heart would break." But the king's daughter was humble, said nothing, and mounted her horse again. She rode some miles further, but the day was warm, the sun scorched her, and she was thirsty once more, and when they came to a stream of water, she again cried to her waiting-maid, "Dismount, and give me some water in my golden cup," for she had long ago forgotten the girl's ill words. But the waiting-maid said still more haughtily, "If you wish to drink, drink as you can. I don't choose to be your maid." Then, in her great thirst, the king's daughter alighted, bent over the flowing stream, wept, and said, "Ah, heaven!" And the drops of blood again replied, "If thy mother knew this, her heart would break." And as she was thus drinking and leaning right over the stream, the handkerchief with the 3 drops of blood fell out of her bosom, and floated away with the water without her observing it, so great was her trouble. The waiting-maid, however, had seen it, and she rejoiced to think that she had now power over the bride, for since the princess had lost the drops of blood, she had become weak and powerless. So now, when she wanted to mount her horse again, the one that was called Falada, the waiting-maid said, "Falada is more suitable for me, and my nag will do for thee." And the princess had to be content with that. Then the waiting-maid, with many hard words, bade the princess exchange her royal apparel for her own shabby clothes, and at length she was compelled to swear by the clear sky above her that she would not say one word of this to anyone at the royal court, and if she had not taken this oath she would have been killed on the spot. But Falada saw all this, and observed it well. The waiting-maid now mounted Falada, and the true bride the bad horse, and thus they travelled onward, until at length they entered the royal palace. There were great rejoicings over her arrival, and the prince sprang forward to meet her, lifted the waiting-maid from her horse, and thought she was his consort. She was conducted upstairs, but the real princess was left standing below. Then the old king looked out of the window, and saw her standing in the courtyard, and how dainty and delicate and beautiful she was, and instantly went to the royal apartment, and asked the bride about the girl she had with her, who was standing down below in the courtyard, and who she was. "I picked her up on my way for a companion. Give the girl something to work at, that she might not stand idle." But the old king had no work for her, and knew of none, so he said, "I have a little boy who tends the geese. She may help him." The boy was called Conrad, and the true bride had to help him to tend the geese. Soon afterward the false bride said to the young king, "Dearest husband, I beg you to do me a favour." He answered, "I will do so most willingly." "Then send for the knacker, and have the head of the horse on which I rode here cut off, for it vexed me on the way." In reality, she was afraid that the horse might tell how she had behaved to the king's daughter. Then she succeeded in making the king promise that it should be done. And the faithful Falada was to die. This came to the ears of the real princess, and she secretly promised to pay the knacker a piece of gold if he would perform a small service for her. There was a great dark-looking gateway in the town, through which morning and evening she had to pass with the geese. Would he be so good as to nail up Falada's head on it, so that she might see him again more than once? The knacker's man promised to do that, and cut off the head, and nailed it fast beneath the dark gateway. Early in the morning, when she and Conrad drove out their flock beneath this gateway, she said in passing, "Alas, Falada, hanging there." Then the head answered, "Alas, young queen, how ill you fare! If this your tender mother knew, her heart would surely break in two." Then they went still further out of the town, and drove their geese into the country. And when they had come to the meadow, she sat down and unbound her hair, which was like pure gold, and Conrad saw it and delighted in its brightness, and wanted to pluck out a few hairs. Then she said, "Blow, blow, thou gentle wind, I say, blow Conrad's little hat away, and make him chase it here and there, until I have braided all my hair, and bound it up again." And there came such a violent wind that it blew Conrad's hat far away across country, and he was forced to run after it. When he came back, she had finished combing her hair and was putting it up again, and he could not get any of it. Then Conrad was angry, and would not speak to her, and thus they watered the geese until evening, and then they went home. Next day, when they were driving the geese out through the dark gateway, the maiden said, "Alas, Falada, hanging there." Falada answered, "Alas, young queen, how ill you fare! If this your tender mother knew, her heart would surely break in two." And she sat down again in the field and began to comb out her hair, and Conrad ran and tried to clutch it, so she said in haste, "Blow, blow, thou gentle wind, I say, blow Conrad's little hat away, and make him chase it here and there, until I have braided all my hair, and bound it up again." Then the wind blew, and blew his little hat off his head and far away, and Conrad was forced to run after it, and when he came back her hair had been put up a long time, and he could get none of it, and so they looked after their geese till evening came. But in the evening, after they had got home, Conrad went to the old king, and said, "I won't tend the geese with that girl any longer." "Why not?" inquired the aged king. "Oh, because she vexes me the whole day long." Then the aged king commanded him to relate what it was that she did to him. And Conrad said, "In the morning, when we pass beneath the dark gateway with the flock, there is a sorry horse's head on the wall, and she says to it, 'Alas, Falada, hanging there,' and the head replies, 'Alas, young queen, how ill you fare! If this your tender mother knew, her heart would surely break in two.'" And Conrad went on to relate what happened on the goose pasture, and how when there he had to chase his hat. The aged king commanded him to drive his flock out again next day, and as soon as morning came he placed himself behind the dark gateway, and heard how the maiden spoke to the head of Falada, and then he too went into the country, and hid himself in the thicket in the meadow. There he soon saw with his own eyes the Goose-Girl and the Goose-Boy bringing their flock, and how, after a while, she sat down and unplaited her hair, which shone with radiance. And soon she said, "Blow, blow, thou gentle wind, I say, blow Conrad's little hat away, and make him chase it here and there, until I have braided all my hair and bound it up again." Then came a blast of wind and carried off Conrad's hat, so that he had to run far away, while the maiden quietly went on combing and plaiting her hair, all of which the king observed. Then, quite unseen, he went away, and when the Goose-Girl came home in the evening, he called her aside, and asked why she did all these things. "I may not tell you that, and I dare not lament my sorrows to any human being, for I have sworn not to do so by the heaven which is above me. If I had not done that, I should have lost my life." He urged her, and left her no peace, but he could draw nothing from her. Then said he, "If thou wilt not tell me anything, tell thy sorrows to the iron stove there." And he went away. Then she crept into the iron stove, and began to weep and lament, and emptied her whole heart, and said, "Here am I, deserted by the whole world, and yet I am a king's daughter, and a false waiting-maid has by force brought me to such a pass that I have been compelled to put off my royal apparel, and she has taken my place with my bridegroom, and I have to perform menial service as a goose-girl. If my mother did but know that, her heart would break." The aged king, however, was standing outside by the pipe of the stove, and was listening to what she said, and heard it. Then he came back again, and bade her come out of the stove, and royal garments were placed on her, and it was marvellous how beautiful she was. The aged king summoned his son, and revealed to him that he had got the false bride who was only a waiting-maid, but that the true one was standing there as the sometime Goose-Girl. The young king rejoiced with all his heart when he saw her beauty and youth, and a great feast was made ready, to which all the people and all good friends were invited. At the head of the table sat the bridegroom, with the king's daughter at one side of him, and the waiting-maid on the other, but the waiting-maid was blinded, and did not recognize the princess in her dazzling array. When they had eaten and drunk, and were merry, the aged king asked the waiting-maid as a riddle what a person deserved who had behaved in such and such a way to her master, and at the same time related the whole story, and asked what sentence such a one merited. Then the false bride said, "She deserves no better fate than to be stripped entirely naked, and put in a barrel which is studded inside with pointed nails, and 2 white horses should be harnessed to it, which will drag her along through one street after another, till she is dead." "It is thou," said the aged king, "and thou must pronounce thine own sentence, and thus it shall be done unto thee." And when the sentence had been carried out, the young king married his true bride, and both of them reigned over their kingdom in peace and happiness. End of chapter 86.
He Who Knew Not Fear. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Junior Classics, Volume 1, by William Patton. Section 87. He Who Knew Not Fear, by Anonymous. A certain father had 2 sons, the elder of whom was sharp and sensible, and could do everything. But the younger was stupid and could neither learn nor understand anything, and when people saw him, they said, "There's a fellow who will give his father some trouble." When anything had to be done, it was always the elder who was forced to do it. But if his father bade him fetch anything when it was late, or in the night time, and the way led through the churchyard or any other dismal place, he answered, "Oh, no, father, I'll not go there, it makes me shudder," for he was afraid. Or when stories were told by the fire at night which made the flesh creep, the listeners often said, "Oh, it makes us shudder." The younger sat in a corner and listened with the rest of them, and could not imagine what they could mean. "They are always saying, 'It makes me shudder, it makes me shudder.' It does not make me shudder," thought he. "That, too, must be an art of which I understand nothing." Now it came to pass that his father said to him one day, "Hearken to me, thou fellow in the corner there. Thou art growing tall and strong, and thou, too, must learn something by which thou canst earn thy living. Look how thy brother works, but thou dost not even earn thy salt." "Well, father," he replied, "I am quite willing to learn something indeed. If it could but be managed, I should like to learn how to shudder. I don't understand that at all yet." The elder brother smiled when he heard that, and thought to himself, "Good God, what a blockhead that brother of mine is! He will never be good for anything as long as he lives. He who wants to be a sickle must bend himself betimes." The father sighed and answered him, "Thou shalt soon learn what it is to suffer, but thou shalt not earn thy living by that." Soon after this, the sexton came to the house on a visit, and the father bewailed his trouble and told him how his younger son was so backward in every respect that he knew nothing and learned nothing. "Just think," said he, "when I asked him how he was going to earn his bread, he actually wanted to learn to shudder." "If that be all," replied the sexton, "he can learn that with me. Send him to me, and I will soon polish him." The father was glad to do it, for he thought, "It will train the boy a little." The sexton therefore took him into his house, and he had to ring the bell. After a day or two the sexton awoke him at midnight, and bade him arise and go up into the church tower and ring the bell. "Thou shalt soon learn what shuddering is," thought he, and secretly went there before him, and when the boy was at the top of the tower and turned around, and was just going to take hold of the bell rope, he saw a white figure standing on the stairs opposite to the sounding hole. "Who is there?" cried he, but the figure made no reply and did not move or stir. "Give an answer," cried the boy, "or take thyself off. Thou hast no business here at night." The sexton, however, remained standing motionless. that the boy might think he was a ghost. The boy cried a second time, "What dost thou want here? Speak if thou art an honest fellow, or I will throw thee down the steps." The sexton thought, he can't intend to be as bad as his words, uttered no sound, and stood as if he were made of stone. Then the boy called to him for the third time, and as that was also to no purpose, he ran against him and pushed the ghost down the stairs, so that it fell down 10 steps and remained laying there in a corner. Thereupon he rang the bell, went home, and without saying a word went to bed and fell asleep. The sexton's wife waited a long time for her husband, but he did not come back. At length she became uneasy and wakened the boy and asked, "Dost thou not know where my husband is? He went up to the tower before thou didst." "No, I don't know," replied the boy, "but someone was standing by the sounding hole on the other side of the steps, and as he would neither give an answer nor go away, I took him for a scoundrel and threw him down the stairs. Just go there, and you will see if it was he. I should be sorry if it were." The woman ran away and found her husband, who was lying moaning in the corner, and had broken his leg. She carried him down, and then with loud screams she hastened to the boy's father. "Your boy," cried she, "has been the cause of a great misfortune. He has thrown my husband down the steps and made him break his leg. Take the good-for-nothing fellow away from our house." The father was terrified and ran thither and scolded the boy. "What wicked tricks are these?" said he. "The devil must have put this into thy head." "Father," he replied, "do listen to me. I am quite innocent. He was standing there by night like one who is intending to do some evil. I did not know who it was, and I entreated him 3 times either to speak or to go away." "Ah," said the father, "I have nothing but unhappiness with thee. Go out of my sight. I will see thee no more." "Yes, father, right willingly. Wait only until it is day. Then will I go forth and learn how to shudder, and then I shall, at any rate, understand one art which will support me." "Learn what thou wilt," spake his father. "It is all the same to me. Here are 50 thalers for thee. Take these and go into the wide world, and tell no one from whence thou comest, and who is thy father, for I have reason to be ashamed of thee." "Yes, father, it shall be as you will. If you desire nothing more than that, I can easily keep it in mind." When day dawned, therefore, the boy put his 50 thalers into his pocket, and went forth on the great highway, and continually said to himself, "If I could but shudder, if I could but shudder." Then a man approached who heard this conversation which the youth was holding with himself. And when they had walked a little further to where they could see the gallows, the man said to him, "Look, there is the tree where 7 men have married the rope-maker's daughter, and are now learning how to fly. Sit down below it, and wait till night comes, and thou wilt soon learn how to shudder." "If that is all that is wanted," answered the youth, "it is easily done. But if I learn how to shudder as quickly as that, thou shalt have my 50 thalers. Just come back to me early in the morning." Then the youth went to the gallows, sat down below it, and waited till evening came. And as he was cold, he lighted himself a fire. But at midnight the wind blew so sharp that in spite of his fire he could not get warm. And as the wind knocked the hanged men against each other, and they moved backward and forward, he thought to himself, "Thou shiverest below by the fire, but how those up above must freeze and suffer." And as he felt pity for them, he raised the ladder and climbed up, unbound one of them after the other, and brought down all 7. Then he stirred the fire, blew it, and set them all round it to warm themselves. But they sat there and did not stir, and the fire caught their clothes. So he said, "Take care, or I will hang you up again." The dead men, however, did not hear, but were quite silent, and let their rags go on burning. On this he grew angry, and said, "If you will not take care, I cannot help you. I will not be burned with you," and he hung them up again, each in his turn. Then he sat down by his fire and fell asleep. The next morning the man came to him and wanted to have the 50 thalers, and said, "Well, dost thou know how to shudder?" No, answered he. How was I to get to know? Those fellows up there did not open their mouths, and were so stupid that they let the few old rags which they had on their bodies get burned. Then the man saw that he would not carry away the 50 thalers that day, and went away saying, Of this kind has never come in my way before. The youth likewise went his way, and once more began to mutter to himself, Ah, if I could but shudder! Ah, if I could but shudder! A waggoner who was striding behind him heard that, and asked, Who art thou? I don't know, answered the youth. Then the waggoner asked, From whence comest thou? I know not. Who is thy father? That I may not tell thee. What is it that thou art always muttering between thy teeth? Ah, replied the youth, I do so wish I could shudder, but no one can teach me how to do it. Give up thy foolish chatter, said the waggoner. Come with me, I will see about a place for thee. The youth went with the waggoner, and in the evening they arrived at an inn where they wished to pass the night. Then at the entrance of the room the youth again said quite loudly, If I could but shudder, if I could but shudder. The host, who heard that, laughed and said, If that is your desire, there ought to be a good opportunity for you here. Ah, be silent, said the hostess. So many inquisitive persons have already lost their lives. It would be a pity and a shame if such beautiful eyes as these should never see the daylight again. But the youth said, However difficult it may be, I will learn it, and for this purpose indeed have I journeyed forth. He let the host have no rest, until the latter told him that not far from thence stood a haunted castle, where anyone could very easily learn what shuddering was, if he would but watch in it for 3 nights. The king had promised that he who would venture this should have his daughter to wife, and she was the most beautiful maiden the sun shone on. Great treasures likewise lay in the castle, which were guarded by evil spirits, and these treasures would then be freed, and would make a poor man rich enough. Already many men had gone into the castle, but as yet none had come out again. Then the youth went next morning to the king, and said that if he were allowed he would watch 3 nights in the enchanted castle. The king looked at him, and as the youth pleased him, he said, Thou mayest ask for 3 things to take into the castle with thee, but they must be things without life. Then he answered, Then I ask for a fire, a turning lathe, and a cutting board with the knife. The king had these things carried into the castle for him during the day. When night was drawing near, the youth went up and made himself a bright fire in one of the rooms, placed the cutting board and knife beside it, and seated himself by the turning lathe. Ah, if I could but shudder, said he, but I shall not learn it here either. Toward midnight he was about to poke his fire, and as he was blowing it, something cried suddenly from one corner, Ah, Mao, how cold we are! You simpletons, cried he, what are you crying about? If you are cold, come and take a seat by the fire and warm yourselves. And when he had said that, 2 great black cats came with one tremendous leap, and sat down on each side of him, and looked savagely at him with their fiery eyes. After a short time, when they had warmed themselves, they said, Comrade, shall we have a game at cards? Why not, he replied, but just show me your paws. Then they stretched out their claws. Oh, said he, what long nails you have! Wait, I must first cut them a little for you. Thereupon he seized them by the throats, put them on the cutting board, and screwed their feet fast. I have looked at your fingers, said he, and my fancy for card playing has gone. And he struck them dead and threw them out into the water. But when he had made away with these 2, and was about to sit down again by his fire, out from every hole and corner came black cats and black dogs with red-hot chains, and more of them came until he could no longer stir, and they yelled horribly, and got on his fire, pulled it to pieces, and wanted to put it out. He watched them for a while quietly, but at last, when they were going too far, he seized his cutting knife and cried, Away with ye, vermin! and began to cut them down. Part of them ran away, the others he killed, and threw out into the fish pond. When he came back he blew up the embers of his fire again and warmed himself. And as he thus sat, his eyes could keep open no longer, and he felt a desire to sleep. Then he looked round and saw a great bed in the corner. "That is the very thing for me," said he, and got into it. When he was just going to shut his eyes, however, the bed began to move of its own accord, and went over the whole of the castle. "That's right," said he, "but go faster." Then the bed rolled on as if 6 horses were harnessed to it, up and down, over thresholds and steps, but suddenly, hop, hop, it turned over upside down and lay on him like a mountain. But he threw quilts and pillows up in the air, got out and said, "Now anyone who likes may drive," and lay down by his fire and slept until it was day. In the morning the king came, and when he saw him laying there on the ground, he thought the spirits had killed him and he was dead. Then said he, "After all, it is a pity. He is a handsome man." The youth heard it, got up and said, "It has not come to that yet." Then the king was astonished, but very glad, and asked how he had fared. "Very well indeed," answered he. "One night is over, and 2 others will get over likewise." Then he went to the innkeeper, who opened his eyes very wide, and said, "I never expected to see thee alive again. Hast thou learned how to shudder yet?" "No," said he, "it is all in vain. If someone would but tell me." The second night he again went up into the old castle, sat down by the fire, and once more began his old song, "If I could but shudder." When midnight came, an uproar and noise of tumbling about was heard. At first it was low, but it grew louder and louder. Then it was quiet for a while, and at length, with a loud scream, half a man came down the chimney and fell before him. "Hullo!" cried he, "another half belongs to this. This is too little." Then the uproar began again. There was a roaring and howling, and the other half fell down likewise. "Wait," said he, "I will just blow up the fire a little for thee." When he had done that and looked round again, the 2 pieces were joined together, and a frightful man was sitting in his place. "That is no part of our bargain," said the youth. "The bench is mine." The man wanted to push him away. The youth, however, would not allow that, but thrust him off with all his strength, and seated himself again in his own place. Then still more men fell down, one after the other. They brought 9 dead men's legs and 2 skulls, and set them up and played at 9-pins with them. The youth also wanted to play, and said, "Hark you, can I join you?" "Yes, if thou hast any money." "Money enough," replied he, "but your balls are not quite round." Then he took the skulls and put them in the lathe and turned them till they were round. "There, now they will roll better," said he. "Hurrah! Now it goes merrily." He played with them and lost some of his money, but when it struck 12, everything vanished from his sight. He lay down and quietly fell asleep. Next morning the king came to inquire after him. "How has it fared with thee this time?" asked he. "I have been playing at 9-pins," he answered, "and have lost a couple of farthings." "Hast thou not shuddered then?" "Eh, what?" said he. "I have made merry. If I did but know what it was to shudder." The third night he sat down again on his bench and said quite sadly, "If I could but shudder." When it grew late, 6 tall men came in and brought a coffin. Then said he, "Ha, ha, that is certainly my little cousin, who only died a few days ago," and he beckoned with his finger and cried, "Come, little cousin, come." They placed the coffin on the ground, but he went to it and took the lid off, and a dead man lay therein. He felt his face, but it was cold as ice. "Stop," said he, "I will warm thee a little," and went to the fire and warmed his hand and laid it on the dead man's face, but he remained cold. Then he took him out and sat down by the fire and laid him on his breast and rubbed his arms that the blood might circulate again. As this also did no good, he thought to himself, "When 2 people lie in bed together, they warm each other," and carried him to bed, covered him over, and lay down by him. After a short time the dead man became warm too, and began to move. Then said the youth, See, little cousin, have I not warned thee? The dead man, however, got up and cried, Now will I strangle thee. What, said he, is that the way thou thankest me? Thou shalt at once go into thy coffin again. And he took him up, threw him into it, and shut the lid. Then came the 6 men and carried him away again. I could not manage to shudder, said he. I shall never learn it here as long as I live. Then a man entered who was taller than all others and looked terrible. He was old, however, and had a long white beard. Thou wretch, cried he, thou shalt soon learn what it is to shudder, for thou shalt die. Not so fast, replied the youth. If I am to die, I shall have to have a say in it. I will soon seize thee, said the fiend. Softly, softly, do not talk so big. I am as strong as thou art, and perhaps even stronger. We shall see, said the old man. If thou art stronger, I will let thee go. Come, we will try. Then he led him by dark passages to a smith's forge, took an axe, and with one blow struck an anvil into the ground. I can do that better still, said the youth, and went to the other anvil. The old man placed himself near and wanted to look on, and his white beard hung down. Then the youth seized the axe, split the anvil with one blow, and struck the old man's beard in with it. Now I have thee, said the youth. Now it is thou who wilt have to die. Then he seized up an iron bar, and beat the old man till he moaned and entreated him to stop, and he would give him great riches. The youth drew out the axe and let him go. The old man led him back into the castle, and in a cellar showed him 3 chests full of gold. Of these, said he, one part is for the poor, the other is for the king, the third is thine. In the meantime it struck 12, and the spirit disappeared. The youth, therefore, was left in darkness. I shall still be able to find my way out, said he, and felt about, found the way into the room, and slept there by his fire. Next morning the king came and said, Now thou must have learned what shuddering is? No, he replied, what can it be? My dead cousin was here, and a bearded man came and showed me a great deal of money down below, but no one told me what it was to shudder. Then, said the king, thou hast delivered the castle, and shalt marry my daughter. That is all very well, said he, but still I do not know what it is to shudder. Then the gold was brought up, and the wedding celebrated. But howsoever much the young king loved his wife, and however happy he was, he still said always, If I could but shudder, if I could but shudder. And at last she was angry at this. Her waiting-maid said, I will find a cure for him, and he shall soon learn what it is to shudder. She went out to the stream which flowed through the garden, and had a whole bucketful of gudgeons brought to her. At night, when the young king was sleeping, his wife was to draw the clothes off him, and empty the bucketful of cold water with the gudgeons in it over him, so that the little fishes would sprawl about him. When this was done, he woke up and cried, Oh, what makes me shudder so? What makes me shudder so, dear wife? Ah, now I know what it is to shudder. End of He Who Knew Not Fear.
This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recorded by Corrie Samuel in January 2007. The Junior Classics, Volume 1 by William Patten, Chapter 88. The Town Mouse and the Country Mouse by Aesop. Now, you must know that a town mouse once upon a time went on a visit to his cousin in the country. He was rough and ready, this cousin, but he loved his town friend and made him heartily welcome. Beans and bacon, cheese and bread were all he had to offer, but he offered them freely. The town mouse rather turned up his long nose at this country fare, and said, I cannot understand, cousin, how you can put up with such poor food as this. But of course you cannot expect anything better in the country. Come you with me, and I will show you how to live. When you have been in town a week,
you will wonder how you could ever have stood a country life." No sooner said than done. The two mice set off for the town, and arrived at the town mouse's residence late at night. "You will want some refreshment after our long journey," said the polite town mouse, and took his friend into the grand dining room. There they found the remains of a fine feast, and soon the two mice were eating up jellies and cakes and all that was nice. Suddenly they heard growling and barking. "What is that?" said the country mouse. "It is only the dogs of the house," answered the other. "Only?" said the country mouse. "I do not like that music at my dinner." Just at that moment the door flew open. In came two huge mastiffs, and the two mice had to scamper down and run off. "Goodbye, cousin," said the country mouse. "What, going so soon?" said the other. "Yes," he replied. "Better beans and bacon in peace than cakes and ale in fear." End of chapter 88.
This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Junior Classics Volume 1 by William Patten. Chapter 89, The Man, Boy, and Donkey by Aesop. A man and his son were once going with their donkey to market. As they were walking along by its side, a countryman passed them and said, "You fools, what is a donkey for but to ride upon?" So the man put the boy on the donkey, and they went on their way. But soon they passed a group of men, one of whom said, "See that lazy youngster, he lets his father walk while he rides." So the man ordered his boy to get off and got on himself. But they hadn't gone far when they passed two women, one of whom said to the other, "Shame on that lazy lout to let his poor little son trudge along." Well, the man didn't know what to do, but at last he took his boy up before him on the donkey. By this time they had come to the town, and the passers-by began to jeer and point to them. The man stopped and asked what they were scoffing at. The man said, "Aren't you ashamed of yourself for overloading that poor donkey of yours, you and your hulking son?" The man and boy got off and tried to think what to do. They thought and they thought, till at last they cut down a pole, tied the donkey's feet to it, and raised the pole and the donkey to their shoulders. They went along amid the laughter of all who met them, till they came to Market Bridge, when the donkey, getting one of his feet loose, kicked out and caused the boy to drop his end of the pole. In the struggle, the donkey fell over the bridge, and his 4 feet being tied together, he was drowned. "That will teach you," said an old man who had followed them. "Please all, and you will please none." End of chapter 89.
This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Junior Classics, Volume 1 by William Patten. Chapter 90, The Shepherd's Boy by Aesop. There was once a young shepherd boy who tended his sheep at the foot of a mountain near a dark forest. It was rather lonely for him all day, so he thought upon a plan by which he could get a little company and some excitement. He rushed down toward the village, calling out, "Wolf! Wolf!" and the villagers came out to meet him, and some of them stopped with him for a considerable time. This pleased the boy so much that a few days afterward he tried the same trick, and again the villagers came to his help. But shortly after this a wolf actually did come out from the forest and began to worry the sheep, and the boy of course cried out, "Wolf! Wolf!" still louder than before. But this time the villagers, who had been fooled twice before, thought the boy was again deceiving them, and nobody stirred to come to his help. So the wolf made a good meal off the boy's flock, and when the boy complained, the wise man of the village said, "A liar will not be believed, even when he speaks the truth." End of chapter 90.
This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recorded by Gary Gilbert, 2007. The Junior Classics, Volume 1, by William Patten. Chapter 91, Androcles. A slave named Androcles once escaped from his master and fled to the forest. As he was wandering about there, he came upon a lion lying down, moaning and groaning. At first he turned to flee, but finding that the lion did not pursue him, he turned back and went up to him. As he came near, the lion put out his paw, which was all swollen and bleeding, and Androcles found that a huge thorn had gotten into it and was causing all the pain. He pulled out the thorn and bound up the paw of the lion, who was soon able to rise and lick the hand of Androcles like a dog. Then the lion took Androcles to his cave, and every day used to bring him meat from which to live. But shortly afterward both Androcles and the lion were captured, and the slave was sentenced to be thrown to the lion, after the latter had been kept without food for several days. The emperor and all his court came to see the spectacle, and Androcles was led out into the middle of the arena. Soon the lion was let loose from his den, and rushed bounding and roaring toward his victim. But as soon as he came near to Androcles, he recognized his friend, and fawned upon him, and licked his hands like a friendly dog. The emperor, surprised at this, summoned Androcles to him, who told him the whole story. Whereupon the slave was pardoned and freed, and the lion let loose to his native forest. End of chapter 91.
This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Junior Classics, Volume 1, by William Patten. Chapter 92, The Fox and the Stork, by Aesop. At one time, the fox and the stork were on visiting terms, and seemed very good friends. So the fox invited the stork to dinner, and for a joke put nothing before her but some soup in a very shallow dish. This the fox could easily lap up, but the stork could only wet the end of her long bill in it, and left the meal as hungry as when she began. "I am sorry," said the fox, "the soup is not to your liking." "Pray do not apologize," said the stork. "I hope you will return this visit, and come and dine with me soon." So a day was appointed when the fox should visit the stork. But when they were seated at table, all that was for their dinner was contained in a very long-necked jar, with a narrow mouth, in which the fox could not insert his snout, so all he could manage to do was to lick the outside of the jar. "I will not apologize for the dinner," said the stork. One bad turn deserves another. End of chapter 92.
This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Junior Classics, Volume 1 by William Patten. Chapter 93, The Crow and the Pitcher. Aesop. A crow, half dead with thirst, came upon a pitcher which had once been full of water. But when the crow put its beak into the mouth of the pitcher, he found that only very little water was left in it, and that he could not reach far enough down to get at it. He tried and he tried, but at last had to give up in despair. Then a thought came to him, and he took a pebble and dropped it into the pitcher. Then he took another pebble and dropped it into the pitcher. Then he took another pebble and dropped that into the pitcher. Then he took another pebble and dropped that into the pitcher. Then he took another pebble and dropped that into the pitcher. Then he took another pebble and dropped that into the pitcher. At last, he saw the water mount up near him, and after casting in a few more pebbles, he was able to quench his thirst and save his life. Little by little does the trick. End of chapter 93.
This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recorded by Andrew LeBrun, Boston, Massachusetts. The Junior Classics, Volume 1, by William Patten. Chapter 94. The Frogs Desiring a King. The frogs were living happy as could be in a marshy swamp that just suited them. They went splashing about, caring for nobody and nobody troubling with them. But some of them thought that this was not right, that they should have a king and a proper constitution. So they determined to send up a petition to Jove to give them what they wanted. "Mighty Jove," they cried, "send unto us a king that will rule over us and keep us in order." Jove laughed at their croaking, and threw down into the swamp a huge log, which came down, kerplash, into the swamp. The frogs were frightened out of their lives by the commotion made in their midst, and all rushed to the bank to look at the horrible monster. But after a time, seeing that it did not move, one or two of the boldest of them ventured out toward the log, and even dared to touch it. Still it did not move. Then the greatest hero of the frogs jumped upon the log, and commenced dancing up and down upon it. Thereupon all the frogs came and did the same. And for some time the frogs went about their business every day without taking the slightest notice of the new king log lying in their midst. But this did not suit them, so they sent another petition to Jove, and said to him, "We want a real king, one that will really rule over us." Now this made Jove angry, so he sent among them a big stork, that soon set to work gobbling them all up. Then the frogs repented, when too late. Better no rule than cruel rule. End of chapter 94. The Frogs Desiring a King.
This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Junior Classics Volume 1 by William Patten. Chapter 95, The Frog and the Ox by Aesop. "Oh, father," said the little frog to the big one sitting by the side of a pool, "I have seen such a terrible monster. It was as big as a mountain, with horns on its head and a long tail, and it had hoofs divided in two." "Tush, child, tush," said the old frog. "That was only Farmer White's ox. It isn't so big either. He may be a little bit taller than I, but I could easily make myself quite as broad. Just you see." So he blew himself out, and blew himself out, and blew himself out. "Was he as big as that?" asked he. "Oh, much bigger than that," said the young frog. Again the old one blew himself out, and asked the young one if the ox was as big as that. "Bigger, father, bigger," was the reply. So the frog took a deep breath, and blew and blew and blew, and swelled and swelled and swelled, and then he said, "I'm sure the ox is not as big as—" But at this moment he burst. Self-conceit may lead to self-destruction. End of chapter 95.
This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Junior Classics, Volume 1, by William Patten. Chapter 96, The Cock and the Pearl, by Aesop. A cock was once strutting up and down the farmyard among the hens, when he espied something shining in the straw. "Ho, ho," quoth he, "that's for me," and soon rooted it out from beneath the straw. What did it turn out to be? But a pearl that by some chance had been lost in the yard. "You may be a treasure," quoth Master Cock, "to men that prize you, but for me, I would rather have a single barley corn than a peck of pearls. Precious things are for those that can prize them." End of chapter 96.
This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. This reading by Fox and the Stars of ShiningHalf.com, March 2006. The Junior Classics Volume 1 by William Patten. Chapter 97. Aesop's Fables, The Fox Without a Tail. It happened that a fox caught its tail in a trap, and in struggling to release himself, lost all of it but the stump. At first he was ashamed to show himself among his fellow foxes, but at last he determined to put a bolder face upon his misfortune, and summoned all the foxes to a general meeting to consider a proposal which he had to place before them. When they had assembled together, the fox proposed that they should all do away with their tails. He pointed out how inconvenient a tail was when they were pursued by their enemies, the dogs, how much it was in the way when they desired to sit down and hold a friendly conversation with one another. He failed to see any advantage in carrying about such a useless encumbrance.
"That is all very well," said one of the older foxes, "but I do not think you would have recommended us to dispense with our chief ornament if you had not happened to lose it yourself."
Distrust interested advice. End of chapter 97. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. This reading by Fox and the Stars of ShiningHalf.com, April 2006. The Junior Classics Volume 1 by William Patten. Chapter 98. Aesop's Fables, The Fox and the Cat. A fox was boasting to a cat of its clever devices for escaping its enemies.
"I have a whole bag of tricks," he said, "which contains 100 ways of escaping my enemies." "I have only one," said the cat, "but I can generally manage with that." Just at that moment they heard the cry of a pack of hounds coming toward them, and the cat immediately scampered up a tree and hid herself in the boughs. "This is my plan," said the cat. "What are you going to do?" The fox thought first of one way, then of another, and while he was debating the hounds came nearer and nearer, and at last the fox in his confusion was caught up by the hounds and soon killed by the huntsman. Miss Puss, who had been looking on, said, "Better one safe way than 100 on which you cannot reckon." End of chapter 98. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. This reading by Fox and the Stars of ShiningHalf.com, April 2006. The Junior Classics Volume 1 by William Patten. Chapter 99. Aesop's Fables, The Dog in the Manger. A dog, looking out for its afternoon nap, jumped into the manger of an ox and lay there cozily upon the straw. But soon the ox, returning from its afternoon work, came up to the manger and wanted to eat some of the straw. The dog, in a rage, being awakened from its slumber, stood up and barked at the ox, and whenever it came near attempted to bite it. At last the ox had to give up hope of getting at the straw, and went away muttering, "Ah, people often grudge others what they cannot enjoy themselves." End of chapter 99. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. This reading by Fox and the Stars of ShiningHalf.com, April 2006. The Junior Classics Volume 1 by William Patten. Chapter 100. Aesop's Fables, The Fox and the Goat.
By an unlucky chance, a fox fell into a deep well from which he could not get out. A goat passed by shortly afterward, and asked the fox what he was doing down there.
"Oh, have you not heard?" said the fox. "There is going to be a great drought, so I jumped down here in order to be sure to have water by me. Why don't you come down too?"
The goat thought well of this advice, and jumped down into the well. But the fox immediately jumped on her back, and by putting his foot on her long horns, managed to jump up to the edge of the well.
"Goodbye, friend," said the fox. "Remember next time, never trust the advice of a man in difficulties."
End of chapter 100. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. This reading by Fox and the Stars of ShiningHalf.com, April 2006. The Junior Classics Volume 1 by William Patten. Chapter 101. Aesop's Fables, Belling the Cat. Long ago, the mice held a general council to consider what measures they could take to outwit their common enemy the cat. Some said this and some said that, but at last a young mouse got up and said he had a proposal to make which he thought would meet the case.
"You will all agree," said he, "that our chief danger consists in the sly and treacherous manner in which the enemy approaches us. Now, if we could receive some signal of her approach, we could easily escape from her. I venture therefore to propose that a small bell be procured and attached by a ribbon round the neck of the cat. By this means we should always know when she was about, and could easily retire while she was in the neighborhood."
This proposed met with general applause, until an old mouse got up and said,
"That is all very well, but who is to bell the cat?"
The mice looked at one another, and nobody spoke. Then the old mouse said,
"It is easy to propose impossible remedies."
End of chapter 101. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. This reading by Fox and the Stars of ShiningHalf.com, April 2006. The Junior Classics Volume 1 by William Patten. Chapter 102. Aesop's Fables, The Jay and the Peacock. A jay, venturing into a yard where peacocks used to walk, found there a number of feathers which had fallen from the peacocks when they were molting. He tied them all to his tail and strutted down toward the peacocks. When he came near them, they soon discovered the cheat, and striding up to him, pecked at him and plucked away his borrowed plumes. So the jay could do no better than go back to the other jays, who had watched his behavior from a distance, but they were equally annoyed with him, and told him, "It is not only fine feathers that make fine birds." End of chapter 102. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. This reading by Fox and the Stars of ShiningHalf.com, March 2006. The Junior Classics Volume 1 by William Patten. Chapter 103. Aesop's Fables, The Ass and the Lapdog. A farmer one day came to the stables to see his beasts of burden. Among them was his favorite ass, that was always well fed and often carried his master. With the farmer came his lapdog, who danced about and licked his hand and frisked about as happy as could be. The farmer felt in his pocket, gave the lapdog some dainty food, and sat down while he gave his orders to his servants. The lapdog jumped into his master's lap and lay there blinking while the farmer stroked his ears. The ass, seeing this, broke loose from his halter and commenced prancing about in imitation of the lapdog. The farmer could not hold his sides with laughter, so the ass went up to him, and putting his feet upon the farmer's shoulder, attempted to climb into his lap. The farmer's servants rushed up with sticks and pitchforks, and soon taught the ass that clumsy jesting is no joke. End of chapter 103.
This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Junior Classics, Volume 1, by William Allan, Chapter 104, The Ant and the Grasshopper, by Aesop. In a field one summer's day, a grasshopper was hopping about, chirping and singing to its heart's content. An ant passed by, bearing along with great toil an ear of corn he was taking to the nest. "Why don't you come and chat with me?" said the grasshopper, "instead of toiling and moiling in that way?" "I'm helping to lay up food for the winter," said the ant, "and I recommend you do the same." "Why bother about the winter?" said the grasshopper. "We have got plenty of food at present." But the ant went on its way and continued its toil. When the winter came, the grasshopper had no food and found itself dying of hunger, while it saw the ants distributing every day corn and grain from the stores they had collected in the summer. Then the grasshopper knew it is best to prepare for the days of necessity. End of The Ant and the Grasshopper.
This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information, or to find out how you can volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recorded by Stephen Carafit in Edmonton, Alberta. October 2006. The Junior Classics, Volume 1, by William Allan. Chapter 105. The Woodman and the Serpent, by Aesop. One wintry day, a woodman was tramping home from his work, when he saw something black lying on the snow. When he came closer, he saw it was a serpent, to all appearance dead. But he took it up and put it in his bosom to warm while he hurried home. As soon as he got indoors, he put the serpent down on the hearth before the fire. The children watched it and saw it slowly come to life again. Then one of them stooped down to stroke it, but the serpent raised its head and put out its fangs and was about to sting the child to death. So the woodman seized his axe and with one stroke cut the serpent in two. "Ah," said he, "no gratitude from the wicked." End of chapter 105.
This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Junior Classics, Volume 1, by William Allan, Chapter 106, The Milkmaid and Her Pail, by Aesop. Patty, the milkmaid, was going to market, carrying her milk in a pail on her head. As she went along, she began calculating what she would do with the money she would get for her milk. "I'll buy some fowls from Farmer Brown," said she, "and they will lay eggs each morning, which I will sell to the parson's wife. With the money that I get from the sale of these eggs, I'll buy myself a new dimity frock and a chip hat. And when I go to market, won't all the young men come up and speak to me? Polly Shaw will be that jealous. But I don't care. I shall just look at her and toss my head like this." As she spoke, she tossed her head back. The pail fell off it, and all the milk was spilt. So she had to go home and tell her mother what had occurred. "Ah, my child," said her mother, "do not count your chickens before they are hatched." End of The Milkmaid and Her Pail.
This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. This reading by Fox in the Stars of ShiningHalf.com, March 2006. The Junior Classics Volume 1 by William Patton. Chapter 107. Aesop's Fables, The Lion and the Mouse. Once, when a lion was asleep, a little mouse began running up and down upon him. This soon wakened the lion, who placed his huge paw upon him and opened his big jaws to swallow him.
"Pardon, O King," cried the little mouse. "Forgive me this time. I shall never forget it. Who knows but what I may be able to do you a turn some of these days?"
The lion was so tickled at the idea of the mouse being able to help him that he lifted up his paw and let him go. Some time after, the lion was caught in a trap, and the hunters, who desired to carry him alive to the king, tied him to a tree while they went in search of a wagon to carry him on. Just then, the little mouse happened to pass by, and seeing the sad plight in which the lion was, went up to him and soon gnawed away the ropes that bound the king of the beasts.
"Was I not right?"
said the little mouse. Little friends may prove great friends. End of chapter 107.
This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Reading by Robin Cotter, Toronto, Ontario, October 2006. The Junior Classics, Volume 1 by William Patton. Chapter 108. Hercules and the Waggoner by Aesop. A waggoner was once driving a heavy load along a very muddy way. At last he came to a part of the road where the wheels sank halfway into the mire, and the more the horses pulled, the deeper sank the wheels. So the waggoner threw down his whip and knelt down and prayed to Hercules the strong. "O Hercules, help me in this my hour of distress," quoth he. But Hercules appeared to him and said, "Tut, man, don't sprawl there. Get up and put your shoulder to the wheel." The gods help them that help themselves. End of chapter 108.
This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. This reading by Fox in the Stars of ShiningHalf.com, April 2006. The Junior Classics Volume 1 by William Patton. Chapter 109. Aesop's Fables, The Lion's Share. The lion once went a-hunting along with the fox, the jackal, and the wolf. They hunted and they hunted, till at last they surprised a stag and soon took its life. Then came the question of how the spoil should be divided. "Quarter me this stag!" roared the lion, so the other animals skinned it and cut it into 4 parts. Then the lion took his stand in front of the carcass and pronounced judgment. The first quarter is for me in my capacity as king of beasts. The second is mine as arbiter. Another share comes to me for my part in the chase. And as for the fourth quarter, well, as for that, I should like to see which of you will dare to lay a paw upon it." "Humph," grumbled the Fox as he walked away with his tail between his legs, but he spoke in a low growl. "You may share the labors of the great, but you will not share the spoil." End of chapter 109.
This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information, or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recorded by Stephen Carefit in Edmonton, Alberta, October 2006. The Junior Classics, Volume 1, by William Patton. Chapter 110, The Fox and the Crow, by Aesop. A fox saw a crow fly off with a piece of cheese in its beak, and settle on the branch of a tree. "That is for me, as I am a fox," said Master Reynard, and he walked up to the foot of the tree. "Good day, Mistress Crow," he cried. "How well you are looking today! How glossy your feathers! How bright your eye! I feel sure your voice must surpass that of other birds, just as your figure does. Let me hear but one song from you, that I may greet you as Queen of the Birds." The crow lifted her head and began to caw her best, but the moment she opened her mouth, the piece of cheese fell to the ground, only to be snapped up by Master Fox. "That will do," said he. "That was all I wanted. In exchange for your cheese, I will give you a piece of advice for the future. Do not trust flatterers." End of chapter 110.
This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. This reading by Fox in the Stars of ShiningHalf.com, April 2006. The Junior Classics, Volume 1, by William Patton. Chapter 111. Aesop's Fables, The Dog and the Shadow. It happened that a dog had got a piece of meat and was carrying it home in his mouth to eat it in peace. Now, on his way home, he had to cross a plank lying across a running brook. As he crossed, he looked down and saw his own shadow reflected in the water beneath. Thinking it was another dog with another piece of meat, he made up his mind to have that also. So he made a snap at the shadow in the water, but as he opened his mouth, the piece of meat fell out, dropped into the water, and was never seen more. Beware lest you lose the substance by grasping at the shadow. End of chapter 111. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. This reading by Fox in the Stars of ShiningHalf.com, April 2006. The Junior Classics, Volume 1, by William Patton. Chapter 112. Aesop's Fables, The Wolf and the Lamb. Once upon a time, a wolf was lapping at a spring on a hillside when, looking up, what should he see but a lamb just beginning to drink a little lower down. "There's my supper," thought he, "if only I can find some excuse to seize it." Then he called out to the lamb, "How dare you muddle the water from which I am drinking?"
"Nay, master, nay," said Lambikin. "If the water be muddy up there, I cannot be the cause of it, for it runs down from you to me."
"Well then," said the wolf, "why did you call me bad names this time last year?"
"That cannot be," said the lamb. "I am only 6 months old." "I don't care," snarled the wolf. "If it was not you, it was your father." And with that he rushed upon the poor little lamb and wara 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 wara, ate her all up. But before she died, she gasped out, "Any excuse will serve a tyrant." End of chapter 112. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. This reading by Fox in the Stars of ShiningHalf.com, April 2006. The Junior Classics Volume 1 by William Patten. Chapter 113. Aesop's Fables, The Bat, the Birds, and the Beasts. A great conflict was about to come off between the birds and the beasts. When the two armies were collected together, the bat hesitated which to join. The birds that passed his perch said, "Come with us." But he said, "I am a beast." Later on, some beasts who were passing underneath him looked up and said, "Come with us." But he said, "I am a bird." Luckily, at the last moment peace was made, and no battle took place. So the bat came to the birds and wished to join in the rejoicings, but they all turned against him, and he had to fly away. He then went to the beasts, but soon had to beat a retreat, or else they would have torn him to pieces. "Ah," said the bat, "I see now, he that is neither one thing nor the other has no friends." End of chapter 113.
This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Junior Classics, Volume 1 by William Patten. Chapter 114, The Belly and the Members, Aesop. One fine day, it occurred to the members of the body that they were doing all the work, and the belly was having all the food. So they held a meeting, and after a long discussion, decided to strike work till the belly consented to take its proper share of the work. So, for a day or two, the hands refused to take the food, the mouth refused to receive it, and the teeth had no work to do. But after a day or two, the members began to find that they themselves were not in a very active condition. The hands could hardly move, and the mouth was all parched and dry, while the legs were unable to support the rest. So thus, they found that even the belly, in its dull, quiet way, was doing necessary work for the body, and that all must work together, or the body will go to pieces. End of chapter 114.
This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. This reading by Fox in the Stars of ShiningHalf.com, April 2006. The Junior Classics Volume 1 by William Patten. Chapter 115. Aesop's Fables, The Fox and the Grapes. One hot summer's day, a fox was strolling through an orchard, till he came to a bunch of grapes just ripening on a vine which had been trained over a lofty branch. "Just the thing to quench my thirst," quoth he. Drawing back a few paces, he took a run and a jump, and just missed the bunch. Turning round again with a 1, 2, 3, he jumped up, but with no greater success. Again and again he tried after the tempting morsel, but at last had to give it up, and walked away with his nose in the air, saying, "I am sure they are sour." It is easy to despise what you cannot get. End of chapter 115.
This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Reading by Robin Cotter, Toronto, Ontario, October 2006. The Junior Classics, Volume 1, by William Patten, Chapter 116. The Swallow and the Other Birds, by Aesop. It happened that a countryman was sowing some hemp seed in a field where a swallow and some other birds were hopping about, picking up their food. "Beware of that man," quoth the swallow. "Why, what is he doing?" said the others. "That is hemp seed he is sowing. Be careful to pick up every one of the seeds, or else you will repent it." The birds paid no heed to the swallow's words, and by the hemp grew up and was made into cord, and of the cords nets were made, and many a bird that had despised the swallow's advice was caught in nets made out of that very hemp. "What did I tell you?" said the swallow. "Destroy the seed of evil, or it will grow up to your ruin." End of chapter 116. End of the Junior Classics, Volume 1, by William Patten.